She locked eyes with me and loudly announced that I was drunk and disorderly, demanding security escort me out all because she wanted my table for a famous TikToker. She had no clue that I was the only person in Seattle authorized to sign the $2 million check that could rescue this struggling restaurant from bankruptcy. But I'm jumping ahead. The story really starts about an hour earlier, around 7 p.m. on a Thursday night. I stood outside the Aurelian room, watching the soft glow of Edison bulbs spill across the etched glass doors. The autumn air smelled of rain-darkened concrete, mixed with expensive cologne drifting from a couple who passed beside me. Tonight, I wasn't Dorothy Campbell, Senior Acquisition Director at Halcyon Capital Group. Tonight, I was an unknown guest. I was here to complete the final mystery shopper phase of our due diligence. Dressed in Seattle tech casual camouflage, I wore dark raw denim jeans that cost $200 and a cream custom-tailored blazer. My hair was pulled into a relaxed ponytail, and I'd traded my usual heels for leather ankle boots. In this city, that was exactly how tech millionaires disguise their wealth, quiet, unflashy. The kind of person who wouldn't hesitate to drop $500 on dinner. My mission was precise. I needed to conduct a first-hand evaluation of the restaurant's operations, service standards, and management capability. The Aurelian room was bleeding money, 2 months behind on payroll, vendor invoices stacking up unpaid. The owners, Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, were desperate to sell and escape to Arizona before everything collapsed. In the due diligence packet sent to Halcyon, the general manager was listed only as M. Fields. I'd already reviewed the financial statements, lease terms, and inspection reports. On paper, it was all salvageable with the right leadership. The location was prime right in the center of downtown Seattle's restaurant corridor. The brand still carried prestige. The structure was solid. It just needed capital and competent management. I pushed open the door and warmth washed over me. Soft jazz hummed from concealed speakers. The aroma of truffle oil and seared meat lingered in the air, crystal chandeliers casting a golden glow over white linens and polished silverware, and then I saw her, standing in the lobby, directing staff with sharp gestures and a leather-bound reservation book, with someone I knew far too well. The name tag on her lapel read, Madeline Fields, General Manager. My heart skipped, then slammed hard against my ribs. It was Madeline Campbell, my biological sister. We'd been no contact for 6 years, and I had no idea she'd married or changed her name. The paperwork hadn't raised alarms. Fields could have been anyone, Marcus, Michelle, Martin. Never in 1,000 imagined scenarios did I think it would be her. To understand why this moment shook me so deeply, you need to go back 6 years. Back then, Madeline was 28 and dreamed of opening a small fashion boutique. She adored luxury designer handbags, premium skincare, Paris trips for inspiration. But she lacked the discipline or business sense to support that lifestyle herself. So she came to me in tears, dreams spilling from her voice, describing a chic Capitol Hill shop selling curated vintage and emerging designers. Under her pleading and relentless pressure from our parents, who'd always treated her like fragile glass, I emptied my savings. $50,000. Every dollar I'd earned grinding through 60-hour weeks at my first investment job. I had one condition. She needed to give me a business plan proof she'd researched the market and had a strategy. Madeline promised. She swore on our grandmother's memory she'd make me proud, that this was her moment to prove herself. Instead, she blew the money on a 3-week luxury trip to the Amalfi Coast with her boyfriend, plus shopping sprees in Milan and Paris. When I saw the photo champagne on yachts, designer bags stacked high, 5-star hotels, my stomach dropped. She'd lied the entire time, claiming the withdrawals were market research and vendor deposits. When I confronted her, Madeline exploded. She ran to her parents' house in hysterics, telling them I was controlling, cruel, and unsupportive. She said the money was a gift and that I was demanding it back out of jealousy. She claimed I couldn't stand seeing her happy or loved. My parents, who always favored Madeline, the charming, beautiful youngest who never faced consequences, scolded me. They accused me of tearing the family apart over money. They told me I was the older sister and should be more generous, more forgiving. Standing in my childhood living room, with my mother's disappointment and my father's disgust aimed squarely at me, I finally understood. To them, I was just an ATM, a resource to drain, not a person to respect. I wrote off the $50,000 as a loss, called it the price of freedom, and cut contact with all of them. Best decision I ever made. Within 2 years, I'd earned 2 promotions. Within 4, I was senior acquisition director. I rebuilt my savings, invested smartly, and created a life where I was valued for my ability, not my bank balance. Back in the present, I stood motionless in the lobby, staring at my sister in her charcoal gray manager's suit tailored, sharp, expensive. She looked older, tougher. Her hair was a sleek bob, her makeup carefully effortless despite the time it must have taken. Recognition flickered across her face when she saw me, just for a second before turning cold. Her eyes swept over me, pausing on my jeans with thinly veiled contempt. To her, I was still the failed, stingy older sister. The boring one. The spreadsheet addict who never truly lived. She had no idea I represented a firm managing $300 million in assets. Without acknowledging me, she motioned for another staff member to handle my table and turned away. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble as she disappeared toward the kitchen. I clenched my hands, then forced them to relax. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. I reminded myself why I was here. Stay professional. Stay focused. This didn't change the evaluation. Still, my heart raced. In contrast to Madeline's dismissal, a waitress named Daisy approached with genuine warmth. She was young, early 20s, with kind eyes and nervous energy that suggested she was new. "Good evening. Welcome to the Aurelian Room," she said, her smile sincere. "Do you have a reservation tonight?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "Under Collins," using the alias my assistant had booked under. Table a week prior. Daisy scanned the reservation book, her finger gliding neatly down the column of names. "Ah, yes, Miss Collins. We have you scheduled for our VIP table this evening. Right this way." She guided me through the main dining room, past couples leaning toward each other in hushed intimacy and business partners sealing quiet deals over crystal glasses. The VIP table sat in the perfect position, visible enough to signal status, yet tucked into a corner that offered discretion and a clear view of the entire restaurant. As I sank into the plush velvet chair, Daisy placed the menu and wine list in front of me with smooth professionalism. "May I start you with something to drink? Our sommelier highly recommends the 2015 Bordeaux tonight. It pairs beautifully with the beef Wellington." "I'll have a glass of the Bordeaux," I said, appreciating her confidence. "And I'd love your recommendations for dinner." Daisy's face brightened instantly. She didn't just recite menu descriptions. She spoke with genuine familiarity. "The duck confit is incredible. It's been on the menu since we opened 15 years ago. But if you're feeling adventurous, the chef has an unlisted special tonight. Pan-seared scallops with saffron beurre blanc. I tried it during family meal, and it was stunning. I ordered both as courses, along with a roasted beet salad to start. When Daisy left to place the order, my real work began. From the VIP table, I pulled out my phone and opened the evaluation checklist I'd prepared in advance. To anyone watching, I looked like another diner scrolling idly. In reality, I was recording every detail. Ambience, excellent. Lighting warm and flattering. Music at the right volume. Temperature comfortable. Decor elegant without tipping into pretension. Service inconsistent. Daisy was exceptional attentive without hovering, knowledgeable, personable. Management, however, had already raised red flags. Location, prime real estate, strong foot traffic, street visibility, easy access to parking and public transit. Brand, solid. The Aurelian Room had history and reputation. 3 years ago, Seattle Magazine had named it one of the city's top 10 fine dining destinations, but the cash flow was failing. The Petersons had been honest about that in their disclosures. Loans taken just to keep the doors open, deferred maintenance, ingredient substitutions to cut costs. Sitting there now, I began to see why. The leadership was the problem. I watched Madeline from across the room. She lingered near the entrance, checking her phone again and again, her posture tense, expectant. Every few minutes, she adjusted the floral arrangement on the host stand or straightened menus that were already perfectly aligned. She snapped at a busboy carrying a tray. I couldn't hear her words, but his shoulders tightened immediately. It dawned on me that the real danger wasn't just financial mismanagement. It was her mindset. She was willing to compromise the experience of regular guests or anyone she personally dismissed in pursuit of superficial validation. The influencer photo, the social media mention, the illusion of success rather than the substance. That philosophy would sink any business eventually. About 15 minutes later, I lifted my glass of red wine, preparing to take my first sip and savor the layered notes of cherry and tobacco when Madeline abruptly appeared at my table. She didn't come to greet me or acknowledge the tension between us. Her movements were fast and aggressive. She approached from my left, gripping a water pitcher with both hands. "Let me refill your water," she said loudly, her voice projecting to nearby tables. Instead of pouring from a polite distance, she invaded my space. She leaned in sharply, her hip knocking into my shoulder as she reached across the table. The contact was deliberate and settling, intrusive. I startled instinctively, recoiling from the sudden pressure. My arm flew outward to steady myself. The wineglass wobbled, and the deep red liquid spilled over the rim. The Bordeaux splashed across the immaculate white tablecloth and soaked into my cream blazer, blooming in dark crimson stains. The wine was cold against my skin, seeping through to the fabric beneath. I felt the dampness spread, shocking and uncomfortable. I looked up at her, jaw clenched, fury tightly contained. "Hey, watch it," I said quietly, controlled, loud enough for her alone. I was painfully aware of nearby diners turning to look, drawn by the abrupt movement. Madeline didn't apologize. Not even performatively. She smirked, actually smirked, and spoke loudly so others could hear. "Ma'am, I was only trying to refill your water. You don't need to get so upset. You're clearly drunk." The words landed like a slap. The surrounding tables fell silent. I could feel assumptions forming instantly. Drunk woman. VIP table. How embarrassing. I set the empty glass down carefully, my hand trembling, not from alcohol, but restraint. "I just arrived," I said evenly. "I haven't even finished one glass of wine. You startled me by getting too close." Madeline leaned in, her mouth near my ear. To observers, it might have looked like attentive customer care. Her whisper, however, was venomous. "I am the law here. Leave now, or I'll call the police for public intoxication. And I'd be very embarrassed if anyone knew you were my sister." The threat was unmistakable. She would humiliate me, arrest me if necessary, do whatever it took to assert control. My mind raced. I could argue, demand the owners, expose her lies, but that would only cement the narrative she was crafting. It would make me look exactly like the unstable drunk she claimed I was. Straightening her jacket, Madeline turned toward the entrance where a security guard stood observing the room. In a crisp, commanding voice, she said, "Please escort this guest out." She arrived intoxicated and is causing a disturbance. The guard, a large man in a black suit, started toward my table. Diners openly stared now, some sympathetic, others judgmental. I heard whispers ripple through the room. Daisy hurried over, worry etched across her face. She knew the truth. She'd taken my order. She'd poured the wine herself barely 15 minutes earlier. She knew I was sober, but under the weight of the general manager's authority, she stayed silent. Daisy's eyes met mine, and in them I saw an apology she couldn't voice, the helplessness of someone who needed this job and couldn't risk defying her boss. I offered her a small smile and a gentle nod, a silent reassurance that I understood, that I didn't blame her, that this wasn't her failure. She was surviving under a tyrant. I drew in a slow, steady breath, grounding myself. I could not afford to lose control now. Anger would only reinforce the image Madeline was crafting. Emotion would become evidence against me. So instead, I went very still, very calm. The kind of calm that comes from certainty, from having a plan, from knowing exactly how the story would end, even if the other person didn't. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and felt something inside me go utterly cold. Not rage, not hurt. Just clean, detached clarity. This wasn't about our past. It wasn't about the $50,000 or the family who had chosen her. It was about who we'd become in the 6 years since I'd walked away. I had become someone who built things, someone who created value, someone trusted with million-dollar decisions because I'd earned that trust through competence and ethics. She had become someone willing to lie to guests, abuse authority, and sacrifice integrity for appearances. I used a napkin to blot at the wine staining my blazer, knowing it was pointless. The damage was done. The cream fabric was ruined. Professional cleaning might not even save it. I lifted my handbag from beside my chair. To everyone watching, I looked like a humiliated guest retreating in defeat. The security guard now stood close, ready to escort me. Madeline crossed her arms, satisfaction radiating from her stance. She believed she'd won, believed she'd put me in my place, proven her dominance, asserted her power. But before I left, I needed confirmation. I needed to hear her reason out loud. I needed certainty because if I was going to end her career, and I was absolutely going to end it, I needed to know it was justified beyond doubt. I leaned closer, just enough that my words wouldn't carry. "Do you really hate me that much?" I asked quietly. Why not just turn me away at the door? For a split second, something flickered across her face, perhaps surprised that I wasn't crying or arguing. Then her expression hardened into triumph. She sneered, the words spilling out without hesitation. "The state's most famous food influencer is coming." She didn't book ahead, but it's my job to give her the best VIP table. In return, she posted a glowing story about the restaurant. She smiled cruelly. "So there it is, sister. I need people who benefit me, not petty ones like you. And you don't deserve a VIP table anyway." There it was. The full picture. She hadn't thrown me out because of hatred alone, though. That was there. She'd thrown me out because I was inconvenient. An obstacle to a social media post. An illusion of success. She had lied about a guest's sobriety, risked legal fallout, created a hostile workplace, and obliterated professional ethics, all for an Instagram story. With that done, Madeline turned to Daisy, who still hovered nearby, hands clasped anxiously. "Clear this table and prepare it for a real VIP. She'll arrive in 10 minutes. Daisy nodded, guilt and sympathy in her eyes. "Yes, Miss Fields." I stood, adjusting my bag. The guard stepped aside but stayed alert, ready if I caused trouble. I walked to the host stand where a young man was processing payments. "I'd like to pay for my wine," I said evenly. He hesitated. The manager said, "I ordered a glass of wine," I repeated, "and I'd like to pay for it." He processed the charge. $42 for a glass I'd barely touched, gratuity included. I used my personal card, not the Halcyon corporate card, and folded the receipt carefully into my wallet. Then I stepped out into the cool Seattle night. Rain had begun falling, the familiar autumn drizzle turning streetlights into shimmering reflections on wet pavement. I walked 2 blocks to my car, a modest, reliable sedan that didn't advertise wealth, and sat behind the wheel with the engine off, listening to rain tap the windshield. My hands were steady as I pulled my laptop from the back seat and powered it on. To an outsider, this looked like humiliation. Thrown out, clothes stained, publicly labeled a drunk, a story strangers would gossip about for weeks. But Madeline couldn't know, that her victory was actually her downfall. This wasn't just cruelty, it was an operational disaster. A general manager willing to fabricate accusations, slander guests, and abuse authority for clout was a legal liability waiting to happen. Someone who would chase away good employees like Daisy, someone who would destroy reputation and value. She had just handed me everything I needed. I opened a new document and typed confidential evaluation report, Aurelian Room acquisition. From Dorothy Campbell, Senior Acquisition Director, to CEO, Halcyon Capital Group. Subject: critical management deficiencies identified during mystery shopper evaluation. I documented everything precisely, professionally, without emotion. The incident, the ruined clothing, the false accusation, the receipt showing 1 glass ordered, the time stamps, potential witness testimony. I framed it not as personal grievance, but as material risk affecting valuation and liability. Then I made my recommendation. Proceed only with immediate management replacement and a reduced purchase price to offset risk. Recommended price, $1.8 million, $200,000 below asking. I attached the receipt. Photos of the stained blazer. Employment records showing M-Filed's 8-month tenure aligning with financial decline. I reviewed the report 3 times, ensuring there was no bias. At 8:47 p.m., I hit send. The email vanished into the digital void, the quiet whoosh echoing in the still car. Madeline thought she'd won. She had no idea she'd just lost everything. Then I opened another message, private, addressed to Christopher Hill, CEO of Halcyon Capital Group. I disclosed the conflict of interest. I explained our estrangement. I affirmed that my assessment stood independent of personal history and formally recused myself from the final decision, recommending a secondary evaluator. I sent that too. Then I closed my laptop and sat in silence. The wine stain had dried, leaving a dark shadow that might never disappear. $400 for the blazer. Easily replaceable, but that wasn't the point. What hurt was realizing my sister hadn't changed. 6 years, and she was still choosing image over substance. Still hurting people without hesitation. I started the car and drove home through quiet streets. The next morning, my phone rang at 6:47 a.m. Chris's name lit the screen. "Dorothy," he said, tense. "I read your report. I'm sending Marcus to follow up. Between us, you saved us from a nightmare. The Petersons called 20 minutes ago. Your sister was fired this morning. That quickly?" I kept my tone neutral. They'd had complaints before. Yours was the last straw. Gross misconduct. No severance. I closed my eyes. "Understood. Get some rest," he said. "You earned it. I'll handle things from here." After we ended the call, I stood at my kitchen window, staring out toward Puget Sound in the distance. The water stretched gray-blue beneath the early morning light, calm, vast, indifferent. Madeline was unemployed now. In a city where the hospitality world was tightly interconnected, where managers talked and reputations traveled fast, she'd be lucky to land a hostess role after this. I should have felt victorious, triumphant. Instead, I felt exhausted. 1 month later, Seattle had fully slipped into fall. The trees lining my street burned with copper and gold, and the crisp air made me pull my favorite cardigan tighter as I walked to my car each morning. Halcyon Capital Group had finalized the acquisition of the Aurelian Room 3 days earlier. The paperwork sat in a leather portfolio on my desk, signed, stamped, irreversible. Final purchase price, $1.8 million. Marcus had completed his independent evaluation and confirmed every finding in my report. The Petersons, desperate and stripped of leverage after the management scandal surfaced, had accepted Halcyon's revised offer $200,000 below asking. $200,000 saved, which Christopher explicitly credited to my diligence and risk assessment. There was talk of a bonus, possibly a promotion to vice president of acquisitions. I should have been celebrating. Instead, I was sitting in my home office on a Wednesday afternoon when my phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number, though I recognized it instantly. I'd never removed it from my old contacts, even after 6 years. Madeline. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could delete it, block it, move on. But I opened it, the first message appeared, "You venomous snake." You knew exactly what that report would do. Another followed. I lost everything because of you. My job, my reputation, my career. Another. All because you can't let go of the past. Then more. You're pathetic. Showing up at my restaurant in cheap jeans, pretending you're some mystery shopper. You planned this just to ruin my life. And finally, I hope you're proud of yourself, Dorothy. You've always been jealous of me. This is who you really are, bitter and vindictive, destroying family out of spite. I read them twice. Then again. The words were painfully familiar. The deflection, the blame, the absolute refusal to see her own role. She was still the victim in her story, still convinced the world was wrong and she was right. You orchestrated this. I almost laughed. If I'd orchestrated anything, I would have planned not to be publicly humiliated, not to have wine spilled on me in front of a dining room full of strangers. I hadn't set a trap. I'd simply shown up to do my job. She'd done the rest. I considered not replying, letting silence speak. But I'd been silent for 6 years, and nothing had changed. She hadn't grown, hadn't learned, still believed the world owed her success just for existing. I typed a response, my hands steady. I didn't fire you. I reported how you treated a customer wearing jeans. You fired yourself. I hit send before I could reconsider. Then I turned my phone off completely. The screen went dark, and with it, the last fragile thread connecting me to the sister I used to have. I walked into the kitchen and made chamomile tea with honey, the way my mother used to when I was young. Steam curled from the cup, warm and calming. I carried it into the living room and sat by the window, watching the Seattle skyline in the distance. Somewhere out there, Madeline was probably raging, probably sending more venom to a dead phone, maybe calling our mother, if she still spoke to her, to complain about how unfair life was, about her terrible sister. But it wasn't my problem anymore. For 6 years, I carried the weight of our broken relationship like a stone in my chest, wondering if I'd been too harsh, if I should reach out, if I should be the bigger person. That night proved I'd made the right choice. Some people don't change. Some spend their entire lives blaming everyone else, never looking inward, never taking responsibility. Madeline was one of them. She always had been. And I was done trying to save her from herself. Sipped my tea and thought about hospitality, the world Madeline chose, and the world I evaluated from the outside. You don't judge a manager by how they treat celebrities or influencers. You judge them by how they treat the guests they don't recognize. The ones in jeans. The ones who look ordinary. Anyone can fawn over fame. That's easy. That's self-serving. But treating everyone with respect, that takes integrity. Madeline had failed that test completely. I smiled into my teacup, feeling lighter than I had in years. My phone stayed off the rest of the evening. Tomorrow, I'd block her number permanently. Forward the messages to my attorney documentation only. But tonight, I sat in the quiet and felt free. The next project was already waiting on my Desca Boutique Hotel in Portland, considering a sale. Christopher wanted me on the initial assessment next week. I was ready. Madeline had taught me something valuable, even if she never meant to. The best revenge isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It's competence. It's telling the truth. Letting someone's own actions speak. And then walking away with your dignity intact, knowing you don't owe toxic people anything least of all your peace. I finished my tea as the sun dipped below the Seattle skyline, painting the sky in orange and pink. The Aurelian Room would reopen in 2 weeks under new management. Halcyon was already interviewing experienced professionals who understood that every guest mattered. Madeline would have to find her own way forward. And I would finally truly move on with mine.